This week's episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast takes a deep dive into Brisbane's rental market, what has been happening throughout 2024. And we have been joined by special guest, Corinne Bohan, who's the Managing Director of Image Property. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Brisbane Property Podcast with your hosts, Melinda and Scott Jennison.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast with Scott and Melinda Jennison. And we've got a special guest in today. We always love having people come in and talk about their profession and share some more information. So we've got Corinne Bohan, who's the Managing Director from Image Property. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very honoured to be here, actually. I've listened to this podcast many times, so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Well, we're super excited to invite you in to share your knowledge and intel with our audience, Corinne, because I know that there's so much value that you'll be able to add today. Image Property, obviously, a property management firm based here in Southeast Queensland. Tell us a little bit about Image Property, just to give our audience some perspective on the number of managements that you look after and what geographical location you cover.
Yeah, great. Look, Image Property started about 13 years ago. It was a little tiny rent roll of 300 that my family acquired, based out of West End. Since that time, it has, we got in and amongst property management and we learned lots of things, what to do well and what not to do. And I think we've really applied an amazing process to the whole industry and been able to scale that. And so we're really excited to be managing just under 5,000 here in Southeast Queensland, with around 400 down in Victoria. And we now have a sales team of about 85 agents as well attached to it. So we service all the way as north as Noosa and south as the Gold Coast at this point in time, looking to grow on the Gold Coast. But yeah, big offices on the Sunshine Coast and a couple of big offices here in Brisbane.
Sounds to me like you're going to be well qualified to share some insights in terms of what is happening throughout Southeast Queensland and even more specifically here in Brisbane in terms of the rental market. Obviously, on this podcast, we do talk a lot about what's changing in the market in terms of prices when people are looking to sell or buy. However, for those that are tenants who are renting properties or those people who are landlords who own properties to rent to tenants, it's a slightly different market. And that's the purpose of today, really, to provide people with some insights in terms of what is happening in that space. And of course, you're going to be super qualified to be able to share that intel with our audience.
Corinne, you would have seen, you said 13 years now, is that correct?
Yes, 13 years that Image has been going for.
So you've probably seen quite a few changes and probably a lot of late as well, where we have seen quite a few changes through the property market, especially the rental side of things. What sort of trends have you seen through the Brisbane market? So in the last, say, 12 months, what sort of things have you seen and sort of trends have you seen change?
Yeah, look, I think the last 12 months is still indicative of what we've seen for that cycle of the last 4 or 5 years, really, since just sort of that pre-COVID period. Prior to this period, we really saw rents were very much, they increased, but it wasn't at this same rate that they have since post-COVID. So we've had massive growth in rent. And in the last year, the last annual, coming to November now, in the last 12 months, we've still seen that increase in rents being achieved in Brisbane, but not at the same rate it was the year before. Yeah. On average, I think it's about annually at the moment, just over 5% for both houses and units. So previously last year it was much more, but we are seeing that whilst they're increasing, they're not increasing at the same rate they were. There's still huge demand, huge. We haven't done anything to fix the supply issue, but I think some other factors have come into play now. I think international migration has sort of hit its peak and slowed a little, but I do think that affordability is causing people to sometimes question how they're living now. So I think we've got a lot of people who possibly previously wouldn't have lived with other adults, professional couples are now taking in another mate to live in the property, or we've got a mum living with a married couple in a house as well. So I think those things are how people are dealing with the affordability. But supply-wise, we haven't had an increase. Like there hasn't been more supply.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like there's been some shifts in terms of the household composition, how people are moving in together, and that's obviously changing the composition of different households, and definitely wanting to explore that in today's episode. Just more broadly speaking, before we get into some of the details, are you seeing any specific trends in certain suburbs or certain property types Is there higher demand for some types of properties compared to others?
I think units have really performed really well in the last 12 months. I think median prices in units and what they're achieving in rent has jumped. And I think a lot of people are now looking at units because houses have become less affordable. So a lot of people who would have loved to have a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with a big backyard have now said that that's not really feasible. And so they have moved to the unit market. So I think that's one of the big trends. I think we've also seen a bit of a push in suburbs, like that creep of where people are going to. And so whilst you've still got those high rents in the inner circle that you have, and were more common to have the higher rents, I think those higher rents and the increases have pushed out as well geographically in Brisbane. So there's certain suburbs now, when I look at what they're achieving in a week's rent, I'm like, wow, like how did that happen? So I think it is just that people are choosing to live in different areas than they might have wanted to previously.
And the way they live, as you touched on earlier, people living together. And we've probably seen this buying property. The unit market, people have enjoyed the units, more affordable, as you mentioned, but also less maintenance, less hassles. They can move into a unit, they get good location, closer to the city, things like that, closer to transport. The housing side of it, look, you've still got that. People still want a house.
Yes.
People, we love that, especially here in Brisbane. When you look at other states and other capitals, Brisbane, we're pretty spoilt. I think have been for a long time, where we've had a backyard and we've had a room for a dog and all those types of things to live that way. And I think that has changed a little bit that way. But as you also mentioned, people are then changing the way they live. That unit side of things with low maintenance, the houses, people are starting to say, oh, well, let's share the rent, and you'll probably get 4 or 5 people wanting to live in the same property together to make it affordable to live in that house as well.
Yeah.
So big changes that way. I think lifestyle changes as well.
Yeah, really big lifestyle changes. I think culturally for Australians, we have very much all had our own little block of dirt, and we've all had the big, fence around it and played cricket in the back. And I think if you look at other cultures internationally, like that's not necessarily how it's reflected, especially in more high density populations. And as our population grows, I think we do. And I think we have realized that there's going to be some changes if we all want to stay close to CBD, that you're not all going to get that block of dirt anymore. And if you don't want to stay close, and, we have seen big increases in people moving to regional areas and so forth, you can still get a house and land. But same as investors came to Queensland not that long ago for house and land packages where it was like a good build and it was just under 600,000, that's no longer available.
That's
so that
right.
stock for investors is also not as much of it around.
Maybe that's had an effect on our cricket in Australia, because we don't have any backyards and we're getting flogged in cricket at the moment. So anyway, it's not a sport podcast, is it?
We should really do something about that. That's it.
I think also, and I just want to sort of expand on what we're just discussing at the moment. So you've talked about the fact that we've seen a shift in household formation and perhaps more people are moving in together. But you also mentioned that there's been a shift in demand for the unit style of living. Those that are looking to rent units in closer proximity to the CBD, what is the drive behind that? Is that proximity to work? Is that more likely around the lifestyle that location brings? Do you get any insights from the tenants as to why they're looking at that particular product, or is it affordability?
I think affordability is one of the major ones.
Yeah.
I think also now we have a lot more amenities in the inner city, and there's a lot of apartment blocks offering a lot more amenities too. So I think you've got a younger professional demographic looking for those buildings that have the add-ons, and there's a lot of them around in Brisbane now, which I think if you went back 10 years ago, it would have been great if you had a barbecue somewhere, whereas now it's like rooftop pools and barbecues everywhere. Additionally to that, I think downsizing. I think there is there's certain people too who are selling properties to become renters, I think at that later stage of life. And I think the units are offering a level of safety. I think that's becoming a bit more paramount. It gets talked about a little bit with tenants, like, oh, we really are looking for this, and this around safety. I think that's become a bit of a bigger issue, and units do provide that as well. So yeah, look, I don't think you would have had a year like this year as far as rental yields and actual capital yields in units has been very much on par with houses. So,
what about interstate migration? Are you seeing an increase in the unit side of it? Because people in Sydney and Melbourne and places like that were probably used to living in units. Has that changed it as well?
I think definitely. I think people who have migrated here from other states are very much used to living in more high density situations than what we are in Queensland, and we've had that's been our biggest source of migration, isn't it, interstate? So if you're coming from Melbourne, they've got units down in Melbourne that are 40 to 50 square meters.
Yeah.
Their approval are for tiny. So if you come here, most of the units here would seem like
Big, yeah.
monstrous compared to that. So yeah, I think they're much more used to it over there. And I think culturally there's a lot of people coming in as well who are used to it as well.
We've obviously seen a lot of change in the legislation for tenancy and rental properties here in Queensland, even as recently as over the last 12 months. Can you just share with us, Corinne, how that may have impacted the rental market and perhaps what some of the biggest challenges are right now for landlords who are providing this rental accommodation?
Yeah. Earlier you said, over the course of the years, what's been the biggest things? I don't think we've ever seen the amount of change in legislation. In running a property management team, we've never had to do as many updates, as much training and so forth as we've done in the last 24 months and a little bit pre to that. It's had a huge effect on the actual administration of property management. So I think in lots of ways that's really good because it's professionalized it. And if you're not a professional operation, you shouldn't be in the space. But there is a lot of admin now around leases and contracts and so forth that we have to be very aware of. So the price changes that are now attached to the house. As far as investors go, I think one of the big effects for them is that they should be looking for a professional to advise them on it, because if there's going to be this level of change, you really need to be guided in it. Yeah. But secondly, I think minimum housing standards and so forth in Brisbane, a lot of them are really sensible. A lot of them are really sensible. I think it is about the rollout of them and making sure that in an environment where the investors have also taken on huge increases to their mortgages and so forth as well, maintenance costs just continuously going up really does price some investors out of the market. And that's, if we don't have investors, we're going to be there's going to be much more of a concern around the housing situation if we don't have investors. So I think making sure we're mindful of the changes we bring in and the flow and effect it has to investors. With minimum housing standards, I think they did allow an amount of time to get them up to date, but we did see we have owners who, Locksmiths got a huge amount of business out of it because there was a lot of things in relation to security and safety, and old Queenslanders, that did have sliding windows and all of that just doesn't cut it anymore. So I think, it did mean that properties were updated, but probably to a sensible standard. And I think if you were really across it with your investors, we were able to advise them and give them a real time frame of when they had to get it done by. So it wasn't just, hey, this has to be done tomorrow, get it done tomorrow. So because financially, I don't think a lot of investors just have that money sitting in an account somewhere to just throw into maintenance.
That's so true. And one of the things I know that our team has found with more recent legislative changes relates to those rental freezes being, I guess, applied to the property itself rather than to the tenancy. And for those people listening, what that means is that here in Queensland now, you can't actually increase the rent on a property within a 12-month period. So that is, even if that property was rented on the 1st of January last year and becomes vacant in December, you can't charge a higher weekly rent in December if you're entering into a new tenancy. You actually have to wait for that 12-month period to lapse. There have been contractual changes for purchase contracts to allow that information to be provided. However, from the buy side, when we're representing buyers, quite often sales agents are not actually familiar with this legislation. So that means, as professional advisors, our team are having to draw this information out from sales agents to ensure that we're adequately advising our investor clients, because the worst thing that could happen is that a new landlord or a new investor purchases a property, is unaware that an existing tenancy may have existed, and they've based their new holding costs off a tenancy, or rather a rental appraisal, which would be today's rent, when in actual fact they can't charge today's rent because there was a previous tenancy in place. So big thing to be aware of if you are listening to this podcast and you are looking to get into the market as a landlord. It's so important that you understand if the property has been leased previously in the last 12 months, because you won't be able to charge more rent until that 12-month period has passed by. So I agree with your advice there, Corinne, in working with professionals that understand these legislative changes, because otherwise you actually could be putting yourself into a situation of there could be some financial loss.
I think a little bit of both of those. And I think the good way you summed up there, Melinda, probably a simple way for people is it's the property. It's not the tenant. So the lease is on the property itself. And that's what you've got to look at. Not, well, when that tenant moves out, I can just increase it.
No.
It's actually on the property. And the other one, as Corinne, as you mentioned, the minimum standards, we're providing a house and shelter for people, and it needs to be safe.
Yes.
And it needs to be something that people can live in. So it's, to me, it makes sense really to provide a certain standard where people can actually live. It's always been, I think, in the past that everyone said, oh, the landlords are the ones that make all the money and they're the cruel ones and all things like that. At the end of the day, they're providing shelter for people, which we don't have enough of. But if they're providing good quality shelter again, look, that's, to me, I think that's a win for everyone. And it's also a good thing for, the landlords to keep their property up to a certain standard as well.
Definitely. And look, we work with so many professional investors, many of your clients, and they're so proactive about what needs to be done.
Yeah.
So it's rare that you get into a situation where you're not meeting a minimum standard. And I think if you have that proactive mindset when you're going into investment, that there will always be some costs. There will always be some maintenance costs, and dependent on the year and the build and all those things, you must factor it in. That's part of having a portfolio or having a property. And look, most of the landlords we work with, they jump on it as soon as they can to get anything fixed. I think it just always has to be mindful when we're making legislative changes that there's two really important parties, and it cannot lean too heavily to one way, because otherwise you're messing with something that's so vital to the community, and you need both parties involved. So in relation to the increase in rent per property, huge change. And it now is that property, and this is what I mean in relation to admin, every single property that sells through Image Property, the agent has that information available to, because we know that it's a holistic circle for property. So if you're buying something off an agent, you should always have that accessible if it has been tenanted. And just the nightmare of like, okay, so I've been renting the property for 12 months. I've got a 12-month lease. We've got the lease done up. You've got a 12-month price in place. And at 9 months, you break lease. We now have to find somebody else, advise them to signing a 12-month lease, that in the 4th month, you're going to have an increase. You have to advertise that online. And so like all of that to be part of your administration process and be on top of it, you really do require professional systems that trigger the property managers to know all of this, so that you're always acting in accordance to legislation. Because the worst thing that happens is you get 6 months in and go, hey, this wasn't valid. You've got to pay back this amount of money.
Are you seeing many break leases at the moment?
It's huge.
Is it?
Huge because of the housing, the feeling of housing insecurity in amongst tenants. Like they don't feel like I could just say, hey, I'm not going to renew and I'll enter the rental market and be able to pick anything up. They're really like listening to, there's not enough rent, there's not enough properties, there's not enough of this. And so that fear of housing is definitely there. So they would rather not indicate that they were leaving the property and wait until they've secured another and then break lease. There's been some changes to break lease costs as well, which are, they used to be sort of unknown. If you broke lease, you had to pay the advertising and everything, and then it was up until we secured another tenant. But now there is a very fixed formulaic cost to the tenant that is factored in, which probably is more leading in tenant friend, to them. So they know now what the cost will be. So I think that takes away that insecurity too. But break lease and additional tenants is a huge amount of work our team are doing all the time, add-on tenants, and just showing that more people having people move in with them.
Yeah, I would have thought the add-on tenants, yes, but the break lease, I'm a bit surprised. I would have thought once people get into a property, they'd want to actually stay there and secure it, and then probably bring more people in.
I think it's also how a lot of people, and we do have a lot of people leaving the rental market to become owner-occupiers, which is great. And you can see that when you've got the cost of rent and what it is now, and if you can enter in, especially the unit market for a similar price, then
So have you got any advice that you can give to landlords, Corinne, in relation to, what they should be doing to ensure that they're compliant? Because I'm sure in some instances you would get some pushback from landlords, especially more recently, given that their costs have escalated with higher interest rates, with a lot of this maintenance that's now being forced upon them with tenancy law upgrades, which rightly so needs to ensure that houses do meet minimum standards. What advice do you have for landlords that may be sort of feeling the pinch in this regard?
I think they need to be aware, and therefore they need someone advising them of exactly what their contractual what they are required to do.
Yep.
Because there are no ifs and buts. If you don't do the emergency work within the time frame, the tenant goes out and does it for up to 4 weeks of rent, and that's allowed under the tenancy agreement. So you have to be respondent to requests that fall under that. And you have to have somebody who is advising you on what your obligations under tenancy legislation is. And there's no real grey area. If you have to do it, it has to be done. And you need to know that you're getting that trusted advice. And in relation to other maintenance that is more, it could be done, it would be nice to be done, the same as the maintenance we live in our houses with. Okay, that door handle is annoying me and it needs to be tightened. We try and be very proactive with our owners about getting trades to their properties to do a lot of work at the one time. And especially when you're having a tenant go in and out, we always recommend to our owners, hey, is there anything we can fix up now where we've got the house empty and we've got a couple of trades there, because it'll be more cost effective for you to do this work right now and get it all done properly than just send somebody out, once every month.
Call out fee once a month.
Yeah, and that's it. The call out fees. Maintenance costs in Queensland, I don't know that they're going to get better.
No.
We've got an Olympics and we don't know where, but we do have a stadium somewhere to build. Infrastructure and those kind of projects are really taking a lot of our trades. So I don't think we know now, quoting and getting 3 quotes, people want to charge for quoting, which it is their time and they have got a plethora of work to do. So I think you've got to be really proactive about how you're doing it and what you're suggesting to owners and what they know they have to do and what they can have a plan to do.
Do you see many? And I think I know the answer to this because I know what investors are generally like. But do you see many people doing proactive, regular maintenance? So, say once a year they'll go in and they'll just clean all the gardens up, or they'll come in and they'll do a handyman to go in, check the locks, check everything. Do people do that much? Like a service of a house, basically?
Yeah, look, we do have some investors who do that. Yes, definitely. We have also like an asset register for every property. So everything that's in your house that is something that stays with the house, we have registered. And so we know timelines of when they will be coming up to, hey, is it worth servicing or worth getting fixed? We have a lot of owners who do exactly that, like with gutters or with termite, definitely the termite and pest control. And then also air conditioners. Air conditioners are a huge one. Like if you get a yearly service as opposed to an emergency call out like in summer when you can't get anyone to the property, there's not an expectation that a tenant would wait in the middle of summer for 2 weeks for somebody to get there and look at their air conditioning or get it serviced without there being compensation or so forth. So I think you've just got to be mindful of those things that you have to take care of. And I think it's highly recommended that you, especially with the gardens, I think if you've got a property that has beautiful gardens and you give it over to a tenant, you've got to remember that they have to keep it and the upkeep of it, but a proper clean out of a garden is something that should be done by a professional. And if you could do it yearly, I think it just makes sure that it is all kept in order. Yeah,
preventative maintenance, I think, is a good way to go. Things like cleaning gutters, especially when we get all the storms up here in Brisbane, and the air conditioning coming into summer. I know I'm talking about, but it's hot here at the moment in Brisbane. It's humid for those southerners. I do talk about the weather occasionally, but it is hot and sweaty here in Brisbane at the moment.
It's so hot. And you can understand, like, if a tenant's air conditioning goes out in the middle of December, you can understand that they're going to be on the phone.
And sometimes if you think about it another way, if you do that sort of service and take care of the property, your tenant will probably want to stay longer and possibly won't complain if the rent does go up as well, because you're taking care of them.
Look, I think, Scott, that's a perfect point, is that a lot of tenants have had these increases put upon them. So therefore, they do expect you to be much more and fairly, like if we're paying for what we deem to be a premium price, and I think a lot of tenants do deem it to be a premium price, then they want a premium product as well.
Absolutely.
You've got to be responsive. It can't be like, hey, I'm going to take more on one hand, but not give more. So I think
that's a good tip for landlords as well. Do that type of service.
Yes.
We all drive cars, and I bet everyone goes and gets their car service when they have to do it.
Yes.
Houses are worth a lot more money, so get them serviced and keep them up to a certain standard as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Corinne, I'd love to get a snapshot view of what you're seeing across the rent roll in Image. Obviously, you've mentioned there are a lot of people that may be selling investment properties. There may also be a lot of people that are buying investment properties, and so you're probably consistently seeing properties leave your rent roll and potentially new properties coming into your rent roll. from an investment perspective, we can look at survey data that Property Investment Professionals of Australia have put out, and Queensland is one of the states. The state where there's a lot of people that have been selling, second behind Victoria in the last 12 months. What are you seeing across your rent roll? Are you still seeing a balanced portfolio, the number of people selling versus coming in as new landlords? Like, just as a snapshot view, probably hard question to answer.
No, definitely. Look, as a snapshot, definitely we're seeing, I think last year, if we asked about last year, I think we were seeing a lot more selling, and you were like,
right, yeah.
So I think you've got a demographic of investors who are like at an older age where they feel like they've really taken the best of the cycle, and maybe now it's time to get out and capitalize on that. Luckily, though, this year I think we've seen it drop down a little bit on how many are selling, but also I think we've seen a real interest again. So we've seen a lot more interstate investment and investors. We're really proud that I think this year we've introduced over 900 so far, which we've got an amazing new business team who have done an exceptional job there. But yes, real interest from interstate again in Brisbane. And so we're seeing a lot of people getting back into it. I think also the RP data just put out is investor loans in Queensland are really high in this last bit, well over 30% investment loans. So I think people see real prosperity in Southeast Queensland particularly, and I think for very good reasons. So luckily for us, about 22% of our stock that is selling currently is selling back to an investor as well. So that would sort of tell us that people do see it as a really viable option, and for good reason, I think.
Yeah, and it's good to know that, because I know that we hear a lot anecdotally about what might be happening out there at a broader scale, but you're seeing it day to day within your business. So you're seeing that shift of, investors who are selling and new investors that are coming onto the book. So thanks for those insights.
What about interest rates? What sort of effect have they had on the property market, you think, for the investor side of it? Have you seen a lot of change in that?
I think it's had a huge effect. I think the story out there is about the rental increases, but the mortgage increases have been mind-blowing. Like people who have held a mortgage throughout this period, the increase that and if you've got somebody who's got a portfolio, the increases on those, and we have lots who are not huge portfolios, but maybe 2 or 3. So they've really a lot of them had to look into if they were going to release one. Sometimes with maintenance costs increasing, they have had looked at that, and we've had lots of investors talk to us about having to reconsider where they're at. I think everyone's sort of waiting for that next, promise of a drop. Or I think the pause here has been good and has allowed people to sort of assess where they're at. Yeah. I think everyone's given up predicting. I think everyone was like, we're looking for February, but it might not come. This might be very much a new normal. I'm not sure, but I think the assessment of value at the moment is a lot of people are still seeing it's very worthwhile for what they've got here.
And when we're looking forward, obviously people as property investors will not be getting into the market for the returns that might happen in the next 6 months. People that are looking at property as an investment asset class typically are looking for long-term opportunity. And of course, when we look at Brisbane and Southeast Queensland, we're always talking about, well, what's coming and what does the future look like? And of course, with this Olympic Games in 2032 and the infrastructure that's being invested between now and then in fast tracking a lot of big major projects, the story looks very bright, and potentially that's one of the reasons why there is a lot of investor interest here in Brisbane and Southeast Queensland as a whole. But from a rental market perspective, what do you expect is likely to happen within the next 12 to 24 months here in Southeast Queensland based on current supply and demand metrics?
Yeah, I think over the last 2 quarters of this year, I think we have sort of seen it stop that incredible increasing rate it was at. And whilst supply hasn't been fixed, I think you have got a lot of tenants moving into an owner occupancy position. So I think without any, and been fortunate enough to sit in a number of seminars and so forth on property, I'm not sure that the answer of supply I don't think anyone has it right now. No. So I don't think supply will change. I think we will still consider it a very tight market for the next 12 to 24 months. And I think with the infrastructure projects that are coming and have to come, you're going to have to get an increase of people coming to service those as well. Even just if you look at the Sunshine Coast, which has had incredibly low vacancy now for the entire post-COVID time, if they're going to do that light railway, they're going to need a lot more people on the Sunshine Coast to do that. And I'm not sure where the housing and so forth is going to come for that. So I think it will remain tight. I think affordability has caused it to sort of plateau. You can't just keep increasing rents at the prices that they were going up at and expect that people will be able to maintain that. Unfortunately, we do see now, like we get a lot of rental applications that are just showing that people have had some issues paying their rents over the previous time, which was a lot less common. But I think budgets are tight. Everyone's household budgets are tight. It's not just the cost of living. It's not just housing, it's food, it's everything else. So I think you will see more situations. I think you already are of kids moving back in with families and things like that. And maybe we're not jumping to move out as soon as it's time to go to university. And I think people will really consider where they're going to be living and the choices they're making around it. And I think we sort of talk about a 2.5 or so people living per property in Australia, or just a little bit less than that on average. I think that could increase for rental properties. I think you would be looking at more people taking up all 4 bedrooms in a 4-bedroom home.
Yeah. And it's definitely a story we experience ourselves. We've got a couple of adult children still living at home. I'm sure they're going to be there for many years to come. And I have no doubt at all that they're in no hurry to leave, because obviously the cost to move out is significant, and therefore that's a big barrier to enabling them to make that jump.
I have a 12-year-old and I love it. I love the idea that he's not. Otherwise, he's moving out in 5 years. So I'm like, no, I like the idea that they're staying into their 20s. I don't know if everyone's in the same camp, but and I might not be when I get there either.
No, I'm thinking about putting the rent up.
And look, you see a lot of parents, investors doing exactly that, buying an investment property to help their kids get into a rental property as well. We've had quite a few of our portfolio investors say, oh, look, I'm going to grab a unit in Brisbane because my son's moving there, and it'll be, I think they see a great capital growth and rental returns, and it helps out a family member. So
we do see quite a bit of that ourselves. People wanting to get into the market just to be in the market, and they know they're going to get a tenant.
Yes.
So from an investment side, people say, well, look, I'll just buy something, I'll rent it out, and there's an opportunity if they've got that opportunity to get into the market to set maybe their kids up or something in the future. We do see a bit of that ourselves here with our team.
And also, I think, if people have got the cash deposit to put in for the purchase and they're only leveraging at 80% with the rents that some of the properties are achieving, especially in that unit market, a lot of the time it's zero cost to hold. It's actually not costing the investor a lot to hold that asset. So therefore, if the income that's being generated on the property is covering the outgoings, interest, property management fees, rates, insurance, etc., it can be a fairly neutral hold, and yet you'll get that capital appreciation over time, which is obviously a great asset to own if the cash flow position is not too negative there as well.
Yeah.
What advice would you give some investors for the Brisbane market at the moment?
Look, I think it's similar with anything that you could really venture into, but with this one, I think when people are going into it, you are going into a purchase that is, well and truly often over the 600, 700 and up to the millions. So I think you've got to go in knowing that the product that you're securing is right. And I think you've also got to know that the people you're entrusting with the product is right as well. I think as far as Brisbane goes at the moment, with most areas, there is a high demand. I think you need to know your location and know the kind of tenants that it's going to attract, though. I think that's really important. I think if you're investing in St. Lucia, just then don't be like, oh, I don't want university students. That's who you're going to get.
The demographic, of course.
Be aware of who's going to be attracted to the property and go into it with that mindset. And I think then take as much time as you can to choose the right person and to asset manage that for you, the property manager, because I think the difference can be substantial and it's going to be an ongoing thing. You're hoping, if you're investing at this point, that you would be holding for 7 to 10 years. That's a long-term investment. So you want somebody who you can work with for that time frame.
And what about for landlord? Is there anything that tenants really love? Like, is there anything that's really attractive for tenants to say, it's got to have a dishwasher? Or is there anything that in particular that people really look for? Air conditioning is I would say definitely.
It's a definite. And we still have some owners who are like, oh, it's got a ceiling fan. You're like, people in Queensland, it's air conditioning. They need air conditioning. I think a lot more people want pets. People want pets. Right. They want dogs. And with the changes to legislation as well, I think you've got to be open-minded and therefore putting forward a property that would be like, you want to make some changes that would make it more suitable. If you're going into building one, like carpet throughout in a tenanted property is not a great idea. Probably floorboards is better in Queensland, and I think it's more durable and has a better lasting effect as well. But I think, overall, it's tenants at the moment. Security is also big for tenants. I think having that security as well, and having just a nice, well-maintained property as well. I think just being proactive about attracting the right people, because you always get what your product's going to attract a certain person.
And Corinne, in relation to tenants, there's obviously still more than one application on a lot of properties that are available for rent. What advice do you have for tenants or prospective tenants looking to secure rental properties? Is there anything that they can do to position themselves more attractively to the landlord so that their application stands out?
Look, I think with changes that came into legislation not long ago, you can't rent bid now. You can't offer more at all. And so that is now, it is about putting your best best tenancy application forward. One for us is make sure you've got all the stuff there that we need. Don't fill one in by halves. Make sure all the people who we're going to be calling to check references and so forth know that we're calling and are available, because for our owners, we want to minimize vacancy. So we want to put the best tenant forward, and we want to do it quickly. So if there's multiple applications there, you want to make sure yours is completely filled out. It's got a great ledger and everything about your previous tenancy, or it's got recommendations of where you've lived previously with it. And then be really responsive and just let the property manager just communicate. If there's reasons, and there is sometimes reasons for stuff on a ledger, just communicate. Give us the information that we need to make sure we're also putting your best story forward to the owners, because what owners want and what they get in a great tenant is valuable.
Can I just get you to clarify when you touched on you can't offer more for the property, just for our listeners? Does that mean if your property's for rent for $800, you can't offer more for it?
No.
But you can't offer to pay in advance?
So both. As of the last changes that came in September, you used to, rent bidding's never been allowed. We're never allowed to say, hey, put in more and so forth, and never have done that. But sometimes tenant would really want a property. It's advertised for 800, and they say, I'll put in 850, and we're allowed to show that to the owner. Now that's not accepted. You can't sign a lease if you've advertised for that amount at a higher amount. And so I think that provides clarity for everyone. And also you can't offer to pay in advance. It was also a change that they made to the legislation. I think that legislation change, I don't know if the people who we offered to pay in advance, who offered mostly to pay in advance previously, were people who possibly had got a fantastic profession but haven't lived here before and have no rental references for us to check. And so they've said, look, I'm going to get a job as a doctor or a teacher, but here's the amount of money I have and I can pay 6 months in advance. And it just provided the landlord with the option of giving them a chance, even though we don't have this really rich rental reference to history to go through. There's a lot of people who've left marriages and have sold the family home, and they maybe haven't got everything else established yet, but have enough money to pay. And I think in most situations, it wasn't like, hey, whoever wants to pay me the most, give me the most. It was for good, valid reason. Or a parent would say, hey, my son is moving out for the first time. We're going to put 3 months rent down. So you don't have to be, that just sort of makes it a little bit more appealing to take a chance on somebody who's got no rental history. So I don't know about that change. It's an interesting one, but you can't offer to pay 3 months in advance anymore.
Yep, perfect.
So it just removes the advantage that some of those tenants had to actually put forward, something that makes them stand out against others in the absence of
a great rental history.
Okay.
And I think if you've got a great rental history, that's great. If you don't have a great rental history, make sure the reasons and everything are there for you as well. So you've still got the best chance as well.
It's great advice.
How do they get in touch? What's the best people? I mean, obviously, landlords looking to rent a property. Look up Image Property. Is
landlords looking to have property management?
Have property management, I should say.
If you want to rent a property, there's lots on the website. Look up Image Property, and we would love to work. We love working with professional investors, people who want to plan to take care of their property, not for 1 year, but for 10 years. That's very much what we've made a reputation out of, and would love the opportunity to work with more.
So go to the website.
Yeah, go to the website. There is a page to get in touch, and one of our team will be back to you quick as a flash.
It sounds good. Customer service. It's what it's all about.
It is.
When representing clients. So, Corinne, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing all of those insights. It's so good to actually have someone who's on the ground in the property management space sharing information with our audience about what's actually happening. So we really appreciate your time and valuable information.
No worries at all. It was lovely to do it. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Corinne, again. Really appreciate it. It's always good to get people that are in that industry and know what they're doing all the time as well to have a chat with us. So as usual, I will let Melinda wrap it up for another week from sunny, warm Brisbane. And from myself, take care and we'll talk next week. Thanks very much for listening and bye for now.
Thank you, everyone. We hope you have enjoyed this week's episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast. As always, if you would like to share this episode with friends and family, please do so. We would love for you to leave us a review. It is how other people find the valuable content that we prepare for you each and every week. We hope you have a good week and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Bye for now.